somebody said the other day, said, Spooner, you're a legend. And I said, well, I think legends are the ones that are passed on, aren't they? I mean,
Well, you would think that, and I actually looked up the definition of a legend, and it said one who inspires.
oh, okay. Well, I hope that's me, and I hope I tell them the right thing.
On camera now, I just have to say thank you. It's not something that you probably typically do, but there's, on behalf of all the people and all the comments that I've read from people on the internet, I'm sure that they're excited about that. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Earlier this morning, we were chatting just a little bit, and you made a comment that you ran away from home, and that's how this all got started, so to speak, how trucking got started. So I figure we should probably just go right back to the beginning, as far back as you'd like to, as far back as you can, starting with where you grew up.
I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, and that was a good place, I guess, back then. It was a turn of a lot of good things. I just didn't agree with everything that was going on with my family, and my mother and dad getting a divorce, and so I ran away from home, and I went to California by the way of a juvenile hall in San Antonio, Texas, that I managed to hop over the fence with a little Mexican guy, and I couldn't speak no Spanish, he couldn't speak no English, but we went to California, the two of us, and rode a freight train, an old coal burning locomotive that had us just as dirty as you could ever get within the first 100 miles, I think. But we went to California, and I worked a little while at Irvine Ranch. Then I wound up over in Knott's Berry Farm. I worked over there, even drove a stagecoach over there for a while.
Okay, so let me ask you, what year was that when you left home, and why did you decide to go to California, of all places?
Well, California was the end thing back in 1954 or 53. I turned 14 years old when I was in San Antonio, Texas, on the way to California, and that was in 1954. So I went on to California. I got a job with Irvine Ranch out there, telling everybody that I was 18 and I was ready to go to work, and sort of fibbed here and there. But I wound up over at Knott's Berry Farm after that, and part of Cecil Irvine traded me with a couple of mules over to Walter Knott at Knott's Berry Farm.
What do you mean you traded you with a couple of mules?
Well, I was taking care of these mules, and they were really just like a couple of puppy dogs to me, and I did anything with them. I could hitch them to the wagon, back up a wagon, do whatever with them, and they were real good mules. They were a match pair, and Walter Knott wanted those mules, and he said he told Cecil, he says, I'll take them if I can take Spooner with it. And so I wound up over at Knott's Berry Farm.
Wow.
And during the time I was at Knott's Berry Farm, I started driving a little dump truck around there, and trash truck during the weekends, and I lived on the place there for a while. I made a few bucks and could get around and chase the girls, and I did really good there at Knott's Berry Farm. Then I got a little wild, got caught with beer in the car and drinking and drunk, and the judge came out on Monday morning. I spent the weekend in jail, me and a boy named Louis Gould. We spent the weekend in jail, and Monday morning the judge gave me my choice. He said, Mr. Spooner, he says, I'll tell you what we're going to do with you. You have your choice to either go to the California Youth Authority, or you can take the military of your choice. And I said, boy, that's a tough decision, but I wanted to go in the Marine Corps because of they had an aviation deal going, and I was into airplanes too, and so I wound up in the Marine Corps, and they sent me to boot camp all the way back to Parris Island, which is going back the other side of Montgomery where I came from, and so yeah, that was hard to do. Anyhow, Parris Island was tough on me, and I guess they taught me right from wrong, and there wasn't no more of that. There was still a lot of drinking and raising hell, but I was in the Marine Corps for 2 years, and I loved it. I was on the rifle team. I worked out of the motor pool, so I started driving a truck, and pretty soon I was ready to get out. Then I went back to California. My mother, in the meantime, had divorced my father, and she married her childhood sweetheart, which was he lived in California. So everything worked out good. I was there near my mother and the family and my brother, and sort of grew up there in Southern California, after the Marine Corps. And I went to work for a guy driving a truck, hauling tomatoes out of Blythe and out of Camarillo and Oxnard, and I worked for him for about 2.5 years. And one day he came along, and I had stopped at Peterbilt truck down in LA and seen a new truck, and I went by there and asked him. I said, "Can we get one of those? I'd love to be driving that." I was driving a damned old Mack, and that Mack was a good truck, but it just wasn't. It was hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And it was an old B61, and Bob Eilers took me down there to Peterbilt and asked me which one I wanted, and that's the truck I got now. We bought it, and I've been driving it ever since, like 57 years of it.
Wow.
And I worked for Bob Eilers after I got the truck for about 4 years, I guess.
Okay.
He also went through a divorce, and he moved to Florida, so I didn't have a job there anymore.
Right. But you were able to keep the truck?
Yes, okay. Yes, I kept the truck. It was all in my name, and so away I went. I'm the one that paid for it.
Okay.
That truck sold for $15,700 when it was brand new.
Wow.
I borrowed $500 from my mother, and that I paid helped pay down on that truck, and it worked out pretty good.
You were telling me about what it was like when you learned how to drive a truck. So tell me what that was like, and tell me about the person that taught you.
Well, when I learned to drive, most of the drivers that were teaching you to drive were owner-operators or people that had grew up in trucking with old chain drive trucks, or trucks that were just so damn tough to drive that, of course, there was no air conditioning, if you had a good heater, you had a good truck, but the drivers were tough, because they wanted you to learn to drive as good as they are right then. So they grilled you pretty good, I told you about the guy that taught me how to drive. He had a tar billy about so long, it looked like a little ball bat, He kept it in that doghouse in a little pouch, and if you ground a gear, well, he'd reach over there and pop your knuckles with that thing, He said, "No, that's not the way you do it. You pay attention to how you push that clutch, and you watch that." He was a stickler on watching the gauges, and I mean he would grill you on those gauges so bad. You would drive that truck, you'd bring it up to 2150, you'd push the clutch in and let it die back, and then you'd grab the other gear, and it would come in at 17, and if you missed the 1700, he might just whop you then. I mean, it was a tough way to learn, and I wanted to learn so bad and be the best. I drove with a guy named Arnold Tipton. He was a St. Louis guy, and he was a perfectionist at being a trucker. I mean, he was. I don't think that ever could made anybody any better, but he wanted you to do it right, and so I learned with him, and God, that was back in 1959.
Yeah. And how old were you then?
I was 19. I just had come out of the Marine Corps.
Okay. Now you mentioned that he would cover the gauges, and what was your thought process on that? You really said something that was really important about that.
He would put his hand over the air pressure gauge, and he'd say, "Spooner, what'd that air pressure say?" Well, you'd look at him, you'd say, "Well, I don't know whether it's cycled here or, it'd go back down to about 105 and it'd kick back on and come up to 120. Well, boy, if you missed it by 5 pounds, he might just whop your ass." He was that kind, and it didn't make any difference whether it was a speedometer or tachometer. He'd put his hand over the tachometer. He said, "How many RPM you running?" Boy, and if you didn't tell him right, he would reprimand you really bad about it. I mean, and I thought the world. I loved the guy. He was great. One day, I come from the Marine Corps, and I was a pretty well snapback kind of guy. He reached over and popped my knuckles one day with that damn tire deal after I'd been driving for him for 6 months, and I could shift that truck better than he could, and he had told me that, but I guess I just sort of goofed up and dragged the gear. He reached over and popped me with that tar belly. I pulled that thing to the side, and I said, "You know what, Arnold?" I said, his name was Arnold Tipton. I said, "I've been driving this truck for 6.5, 7 months, and I can drive it better than you right now. And you're over here popping me with that tar belly. I'm going to stick that thing in your butt." I'm going to, and he was a big old boy. He was the kind that probably would have got out and duked it out with you, but he just looked at me and laughed, and he said, "Well, you're a good truck driver." So that was it.
Frustrating at the same time, but at the same time, there's a reason for that, and
yes,
and I would say the way that you mentioned it was for the purpose of understanding what's going on.
Paying attention. You have to, with trucking, there's never a slack moment. Whether you're just sitting there lax, and now we got all this cruise control. If you're sitting there lax, there's never a second goes by that you better not be paying attention. It's something that these young kids don't understand anymore. Pay attention to what your engine's doing. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting on the side of the road up here trying to figure out what's wrong with it.
Right.
When I was growing up, if somebody come up and asked me, "Hey, what kind of motor you got in that old Mack?" I could say, "Well, I think it's I said, "I'm pretty sure that it's a 250 Cummins with a turbo, so I got what they call a 280. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, what kind of oil pressure is this?" And you'd tell him. You can ask the driver nowadays, "What kind of motor you got in there?" "I don't know," and that's not good. They just don't know what they're missing. Mm-hmm. It's all part of driving a truck, mm-hmm. and being an access to what you're doing and thinking about the money you're going to make. Mm-hmm. Because when you mess up one of those gauges over there, nobody to pop your knuckles. It's going to come out of your pocket.
Right.
And it's a tough way to do it.
Right.
Even if you're a company driver, it's going to come out of your pocket because you're going to be on the side of the road, mm-hmm. and the company is going to have to send another truck for you. Well, you're not going to get paid for sitting.
Right. What was it like to buy a truck like that back then?
Well, back then they sold you a truck from like Peterbilt. They did the financing, they put the insurance on that truck, everything together. I was paying $450 a month, and I paid it out at the end of that 4 years. There was a little, I don't remember what it was, but I had to pay a little of the interest on the money. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you something now, 15,700 was an awful lot of money in 1960. I bought that truck in September of 60. The truck was, it was a single axle. It was a nice little Model 281, which they called a lightweight. I pulled a set of 24-foot flatbeds with Bob Eilers, and I hauled potatoes, I hauled tomatoes, I hauled all kind of parts for aircraft. We hauled out a Boeing aircraft. I hauled a Peterbilt every week with a load of parts out of Los Angeles, and I'd haul a load of Peterbilt parts back to Los Angeles. So I had a really good haul.
What was $15,000 comparable to now?
Well, let me give you a good comparison. I got married that year. I bought a house in Roland Heights, California, or La Puente, and I give $10,900 for that house. And it was as nice a home as you could buy. I mean, it was a tract home, and they had built like 50 of them in that subdivision. I probably got the best house of the bunch. But in 1970, when I left there and moved to Arkansas, that house sold for $146,000. So that was the difference in the inflation in just 10 years.
So I can see the comparison that, you can buy a house for less than you can buy a truck then.
That's right. In 1970, I bought a place in Arkansas. It's 4.5 acres, and I built 2 big shops there. The property next to me, 4.5 acres, came available in I think that was 77 or 78. I give $55,000 for that place. I give $40,000 for the first place I bought, and right now it's at $750,000.
Wow.
Makes me sound like I got something, but I don't. I just owe a big payment to the bank. The only difference is the money and the brokers and the agents that are working the trucking nowadays. We didn't have back then. Everything was regulated. I got my authority in 1968 or 69 before I went to Arkansas, and before then I could haul just about anything with a natural resources plate and book it myself. But as things evolved, you had to have authority to do anything, and we got my authority, and I had a lot of people like the van lines, because I was doing van line freight, which was trade shows, and the trade shows were highly regulated. So I broke into that with a little deal to where I could haul them, and as long as you provide a service with the transportation, you were void from their aspect of just hauling them.
Okay.
So I got my authority, and I had a lot of, Atlas and Beacons and North American. Everybody contested my deal, but I managed to get it through with the squeaking part of the service company.
Interesting. Now, I want to back up and ask you, you said you could beforehand, before getting your authority, you could haul anything with a natural resources plate. Explain what that is, because I've never heard that.
Well, they don't have that anymore, but any natural resource, like, even I think lumber was included in that, and anything that was grown with the farm, agriculture, you could haul it without having authority. And all of the states sort of jumped on that. They were charging you for a natural resource plate. They made it where you had to have a plate in every state you went in, and we had a stack of license plates. We used to change them in every state, and it was a different deal altogether. It was different trucking, but as that thing came along and they did away with with having all of that authority and doing this and that, it actually went to the better, I think. You'll have a lot of guys saying, once they deregulated all of this, it didn't work, but it did. And I still have my authority. I still haul whatever I want to haul. I've even got Class A and B explosives. I can, I can haul everything that's not regulated.
With getting your authority, what was that process like back then?
In the 60s, when you took and filed for your authority, I had to go to Cincinnati, Ohio, because that's where they were working the Interstate Commerce Commission out of there. I went through a little court procedure. They had all of these companies that were contesting my authority. They were there and they presented their case with a lawyer saying that I was taking their freight. And it's not actually like that. I had people like Snap-on Tools. I had people that were in the medical field, a lot of medical exhibits that I was hauling, and they were there. They went to court with me, and they explained their case of why my authority meant more to them than what Beacons or Lion or one of the van lines meant. And so it turned out pretty good. It was a regular court hearing. It lasted about 4 hours up there in a big building in Cincinnati.
Why were you on their radar like that, to where they would come and say, hey, well, what are you doing?
Because I had already been hauling Richards Medical, and I'd already been hauling Snap-on, but the difference that they had, see, they wanted to book the load, but not do anything other than haul it. And Snap-on wanted me to haul it. I took it to the show. I set their exhibit up. I supervised even laying their carpet or vacuuming their carpet during the show.
Okay.
I did all of it. So it worked out a lot better for them, and the judge agreed with it.
What led you to move from hauling the displays and things of that nature and Snap-on to something else?
Well, I had exhibits like with Snap-on and Hunter Engineering and Medtronic. I had a couple of good trucks that I'd bought that went on with Medtronic, and they was paying me great. It was big money.
What year was that, and what were you making?
I think Medtronic was in 88, 89, I guess. It was right at 90. They was paying me $300,000 plus all my fuel just to pull their trailer around to the hospitals, and I did less than 12,000 miles a year with those trucks. I had drivers on them, and that was paying me so good. I guess I got spoiled. But when Snap-on got a new CEO of the company, and they started cutting, this guy was going to make a name for himself and cut back all the rates on everything. When he got to me, I told him he could take it and shine it. I just walked away from it. And he says, well, you've been here 40 years, you can't quit. And I said, well, buddy, I just did. And I said, I'm not going to put up with what we're doing. I came here at the same rate that I'm at right now. I've never upped your rate. I've charged you to go to the show. I've charged you to set the exhibits up. I paid for all of my guys to join the union out there, and so they could work at the convention centers. And now you're wanting to cut that rate? I just can't do it.
Right.
So that's the way, and I walked away from Medtronic the same way. During this deal of where all the brokers are coming in, telling them that, oh, we can get this haul for you a lot cheaper than what you're paying Spooner, and then of course the authority sort of went by the wayside too. So I bowed out, and I bought that step deck trailer. I started selling trucks and getting rid of everything, and I'm doing now what I always wanted to do in the beginning.
Okay. Now you said you started selling trucks. How many trucks were you running with Medtronics?
I had 9 that last time, the last show.
Okay.
We went to California. I had a few lease trucks, and then I had mine.
Okay. And so for 40 years you were doing that, right? Is that what you
Yes,
said?
40 years at Snap-on. Well, in like 1964, 65, somewhere in there, I went to work for Neptune Van Lines. And I ran from LA to New Rochelle, New York. And it was a different deal altogether than hauling tomatoes or potatoes out in California. But I worked over there for about a year, I guess. We ran to New Rochelle, New York, and of course that included the winter months too, but there were no interstates. The biggest thing was Texas had interregional highways. That was the closest thing to what we've got today as an interstate. But I can tell you every road from California to New Rochelle, New York, and Binghamton that was built and when it was built. You know, I can remember in the 70s even when they started across Texas over there and where the old 66 was, it became, you know, Interstate 40. And that was all done in 72 and 74, right in there. It was a completely different deal, and when I started running across the South, I'd run all the way from LA. I'd go to Atlanta, and then I'd turn and go north up to New Rochelle, and you wouldn't see another truck every 15 minutes. I mean, there was just not the trucks here. It's not like today where it's a steady line of trucks. It was a good life. It was a lot of fun. Drivers watched after each other then, and it was safe to be out there, you know. And it was just a better world, but not making the money that we make today, of course, with the inflation and everything, and accessibility to, you know, you had to buy a permit for every damn state back then, and now you can go, you know. If I'm sitting here in my truck today and I decide I want to get a load going to Washington State, buddy, I just get it and go, you know, and I, as long as I agree with the price on it, you know. But it's a lot of difference, and it's a better living if you enjoy going like I do. I was, you know, my mother used to tell me, said, Bobby, you're just a roamer. You're always going to be a roamer, and I guess I am. Chris, I think I believe I'm going to piss them off and do it another 75 years. So,
well, you're well on your way. When you mentioned about traveling from California to New Rochelle, New York, and there not being any interstate, so the roads were like 2 lanes?
2 lanes, narrow. You used to go across that old bridge over there going into Mississippi. You had to fold your mirrors in, or you'd get them tore off with the truck going the other way. You might not meet another truck, but you'd get against the guardrail and just squall the tires all the way across the Mississippi River. I mean, it was a do or die. You had to do it. I mean, and the roads were narrow. Like right now, down on Interstate 8 or US 80, the old US 80 that we used to drive, they've made it it's 2 feet wider than what it was back in 1960, and it's still narrow. I mean, it's amazing. There's a lot of difference in the roads and changes, and there were rough old roads going across, you know, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and not only that, it was hot back in the 60s down there, you know, and humid, and so you got tired pretty fast, but you did, you know, it was a good. I'd do it again if I could.
Yeah. Now, what was the average speed on some of the?
Whatever you could get away with, Chris. I used to be an advocate of big horsepower and tall gears, you know, but the speed limit then, California had a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit when I first started driving my truck, and they meant it. That was a big thing for them to write trucks, but And then Arizona, you know, you could get over there and you could run 60 mile an hour over in Arizona, which we thought we were in another world, you know. Most of the states were 50, 55. Some of them would get up to 60, but not very often.
How many days would it take you to get from, you know, California to New York running the way you did?
I don't know whether I should say this on the video or not, but back in the 50s and 60s, the little white cross would get you across there in about 52 hours from LA to New York.
Okay. Well, see, that's a new one. You made a comment about a little white cross, and I wasn't really sure if I knew what you were talking about. So,
well, they called it Benzodrine or whatever they want to call it.
Okay.
I've heard it called everything.
Okay.
But I took a few of those trying to get on across there and make my deal, you know. But that was when I was young and dumb and didn't know better.
Right.
You know.
Now, and that was probably considered to be almost normal, you know, for
It
guys
was a
to do?
normal deal back then. You know, a lot of the drivers did it. A lot of them were against it. You know, if you worked hard, and like I was a hard worker. You know, I stayed steady at it. I wanted to be the best at what I was doing. You know, and 52 hours really tripped me up. Well, when I could run to New Rochelle, New York out of LA, you can't hardly do that now with all the interstates.
Yeah.
You know, if you're double team, you could do it pretty easy, but hell, I was a double team and didn't even know it.
Yes. I really want people to understand what it was like, you know, making that trip, because again, that's literally across the country. Where were some of the stopping points when you would make that trip?
Well, you know, I didn't have a sleeper for a long time on my truck, and if you did have one, it was usually a little 32, 36-inch sleeper. So I built a 4-foot drum plate on the back of my truck behind the cab, and I used to carry my sleeping bag and a blanket roll out there, and you could do that back then, and nobody would bother you, you know. Some of the states like Arizona started telling you, well, you can't show sleeper here, you can't show sleeper there because you have no sleeper, you know, and so they'd get you on the logbook, and it was easy. I made stops at special places that I liked, the food or the camaraderie or friends. You made friends with everybody all the way across. You know, the people at the restaurants, they'd remember you. It was just a better type world.
What was it like to drum up a conversation? You know, now you walk into a place and nobody looks at you or nobody says
That's
anything,
right.
or
Yeah.
so. What was it like then?
They were like family. The trucking was like family back then. You know, it went from going down the road, you blink the lights twice at the guy coming at you, you knew the cop was up there, you know, or you'd hold up 2 fingers and tell him the cop was there, you know. Before the CBs, you could walk across a truck stop and you spoke to everybody, you know. If he was a trucker, you could tell who he was because most of them wore Frisco jeans, engineer boots, and white t-shirts. That was the way we dressed for years, you know. You know, you'd be walking across the parking lot and the guy would stop you and say, hey, you know how the weather is back over here in Georgia or how the weather is up there and going across North Carolina? And it was, and you didn't mind telling him. It wasn't like, you couldn't be scared of the guy, you know. It was just being a friend.
Yeah. And you know, you said something that made me realize that now we all have access to a lot of information, so we can be independent that way when it comes to information. So I don't need to know, you know, to ask you what the weather is. I can get on my little phone and figure out the weather, you know, anywhere, you know, whereas
you got to know how to do that, Chris.
Yeah. Whereas, you know, back then you had to be dependent on someone who actually experienced the state, you know, that you're headed to, and so they can share that with you.
You knew by the truck the guy was driving, like if you was coming into El Paso and you seen that Braswell truck, you know, you knew them because in their shutters they had a big B in the front. They were a green truck, and you see the guy walking from the Braswell truck, you knew that he was a Texas guy, and so you could ask, what's going on over in Texas? Are the cops working anywhere, or this or that? And you pretty well knew where they were going to be, you know.
What was it like to hear about what the CB was and the uses for it? It's kind of like, you know, when the smartphones came out, people were like, well, I don't need a smartphone. My phone is just fine, or my house phone is just fine. Now everybody has one. So what was that like to deal with that?
Well, I had an old Blackface Johnson tube set in my truck. And if you left that thing on, it'd kill the batteries. You know, I mean, it took a lot of juice. And I later on, I bought a linear for it, you know, but you had to buy a crystal to get on that channel. So this little crystal fit in your radio. I think mine that Blackface held 5 crystals. So you had 5 channels, you know, and then, I don't know, Radio Shack came out with one of them that had 23 channels. And that was a hot thing back then, you know, but it kept our communications going, and everybody used to run on Channel 9 way back. And then Channel 9 became the react channel that the react people, in case of storms or whatever, started using. So everybody went to 19, and all except the guys out in California, they got to be different, you know. They want to go to 15 here and 17 there, and you never know what channel they're on in California. Never.
Yeah.
mean,
I thought it was dead quiet out there when I was out there a couple of years ago, and I had my radio on Channel 19. I'm trying to talk to guys, and you know, I'm like, gosh, these guys never have their radio on. Then I learned within half an hour that they're on a different channel. So
well, you know, they evolved into that, Chris, because the sideband people up around Porterville and Visalia in the middle of the state, they were on sideband. So they were talking, and you could hear part of the conversation, but you couldn't understand it, you know. And so they got over on 19 with that sideband, so everybody that ran north and south up 99 would go to 15 or 17, you know, and it got away from it.
Okay. What do you think of it? You know, because you've been driving for a while without one, so now, hey, we got this new thing, you should put it in your truck. What was your thoughts on that?
Well, when they first came out with CBs, everybody was scared to get on them because you had to have a license to operate it. It was a radio, just like ham. So we'd get on there anyhow. You know, we just bootlegged on it and got on there and talked. But I did file and get my license for CB. I never forget it. It was KKX 8080. That was my radio deal. And then of course the FCC, during all that change of CBs, those CBs would bleed over on television, and for people that just bought a new television and didn't even know what it was, you know. I remember when the TVs come out, you know, but they were so close to the CB frequency that when you keyed your mic, you'd bleed over on them, or you'd cause a big screen to go crazy, you know, black and white screen.
Interesting.
And then the FCC jumped on everybody's case. They sent little trucks out that monitored. They'd drive down a highway, and one of them would be 2 miles ahead, and the other one would be back behind. They could pinpoint where the guy was.
Really?
They'd pull you over and give you a ticket for talking on a CB illegally. You know, so it didn't happen all that much, but people were scared of the CB because of that, you know.
Tell me about some of the pros and the cons of trucking over the years.
Back then it was difficult with the license and the regulations of the, you know, the DOT was, and each state almost, you know, well, take for instance Arizona. Arizona had an ACC, they call it. It was Arizona Commerce Commission, and they they were given too much authority over trucks. Those people they'd pull you over out of the wild blue for nothing, and just rake you over the coals with the logbooks, you'd cross into their state of Arizona. You just have to take your logbook out of the truck, walk in and stick it under a stamp and stamp the time and where you were at. You had to do that, and if you got stopped anywhere along the border, anywhere or in between the borders, they would almost shoot you and take your birthday. I mean, they were really bad, Chris. And New Mexico was tough. They were the same way. Texas was pretty lenient on trucks for a long time. Now it's evolved to the other way, I guess.
What do you think would be the best way for a person to learn the ropes of trucking, to get their feet wet, to learn how to drive, then to learn the how should I say, the process? What would you recommend?
To learn the process to be an independent owner-operator, or just to be the best at what they're doing?
Yeah, just to get their feet wet with driving a truck first, and then they may decide to progress into something else.
They've got to remember one thing. They've only got one thing to sell, and that's themselves and the service. If they can't give them the service, they might as well go find another trade. But the service part is the challenge, and it's the best of it all, because if you can if you can do it the way that it's supposed to be done, and the guy that you're working for and you're looking after his equipment, whether it's a big company, whether it's Swift or Snyder or whoever, if you're looking after their equipment, that's the main thing, and the safety of operating that thing, which, that's the best I could pass along to them. And just be part of what you're doing. Don't just go in there and say, well, I'm a truck driver, and he's not. He's a steering wheel holder, until he learns the difference. I think if you could find an owner-operator that would be willing to teach you to drive a truck, somebody that's been out there for a while, that would be the best way to break into learning and doing. I've got friends that went to truck driving school, and they didn't know the first thing when they got out. That was a money deal. They got out of truck driving school and they're driving a truck. 2 weeks later, well, you can't learn in 2 weeks everything that's out here. If you don't learn everything in 2 weeks, you stand such a chance of not making it. The fact that you could get an owner-operator or somebody and go take a course in the school and then come to work for an owner-operator, that would be the best way to learn.
An owner-operator would be a better choice than a school.
Yes.
And so explain why.
Well, an owner-operator's got more of his life involved in the truck that you're going to be driving, and he has more knowledge, other than maybe some of the laws or something that they're going to contend with. If he's an interstate driver and he runs east to west or north to south, he's covering a few states, and that's probably your best way to learn right there. The truck driving school's not going to tell you when you got black ice on that road up here in Wyoming next month, or you're going too fast for the conditions. They're not going to tell you, but that owner-operator is going to tell you, and that's where it all comes down. I mean, I wished I could teach every one of them. I mean, but I don't have the patience for it, nor the time for it right now, but I've taught my boys, my sons, I've taught all of their buddies that came to work for me, and I think if you ask them, that's what they'd tell you.
What are some of the most memorable moments? Some like a feel-good story where you feel like you've done something that was just great. So out of all those years, what are some of the things, some of those moments?
Well, you know what, Chris? There's a couple of them. One of them that stands out in my mind is the fact that you walked up to me one day in Springfield and gave me an interview. And I don't know whether you'd want to hear that, but you put me on the. You've got people walking around telling me that I'm a legend, you know, and I appreciate that. But that to my mind right now is the most memorable deal that I've done. And like I told you the other day, I thought maybe you were 7 foot tall, you know. But I did a lot of good stuff. I've hauled things that, you know, I hauled part of the Apollo space capsule program. I hauled the capsule. I had a security guy sitting in my truck with a damn machine gun or a M14 or whatever the hell they call them. And he was sitting there with me and rode all the way from out at Lancaster, California to Titusville, Florida. You know, and I had cars behind me and then cars in front of me that they were security, and we stayed every night on a military base. And I enjoyed the hell out of it. I mean, it was it was a good deal. And they knew what I was going through pulling that thing. You know, it was a lot of fun. But I have hauled so many neat things over the years. I just, you know, I hauled that F-35 that they got now. That's that real hot dog. I couldn't see it because they had it all wrapped up. I loaded it out of Lancaster, took it down to Boeing in Long Beach, or in Long Beach. I've hauled these gearboxes to these big wind generators. You know, I've done a lot of that. That's a lot of fun because you meet guys that are real professional about what they're doing. You know, and they like to see the way that you've taken care of their equipment. It does me good. Even back when I drove that damned old stagecoach at Notch, you know, I wanted to be the best, and I've tried over that. The best part of this is all the friends that I've got, and you've made it tenfold since that little interview that you did with me in Springfield. But to the best part of it, you know, it's the friendship and the camaraderie out here, and Christopher, I can't hardly walk into a place right now, even with my wife with me sometimes. I'll walk in, and I was at Walmart, walking in the deal in Walmart there, pushing a basket, and a little Indian guy down there in Gallup, New Mexico. He's pointing at me like that, and I thought, uh-oh, what'd I do? Hit it? I thought maybe I bumped his car or something in the parking lot, you know. No. Anyhow, he said, he's pointing his finger. He says, "You're Bob Spinner." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he says, "I seen your Christopher's video of you on Facebook, and it's done me good. Yeah. It's really done me good. I've enjoyed it so much, and I try to pass along all of my knowledge to these new drivers that'll listen. You know, there's not a bunch of them that'll listen anymore. Right. You know, this is a good business to be in, and I love it. One time I was asked to haul a little car that looked like it fell off of the front of the funny papers or something, like a Jetsons, looked just like the little Jetsons mobile. This car could fly to 11,000 feet altitude. It could drive down the highway, and you could run it right at something. It would stop before it got there, or either it would go over it. It was a deal that I hauled around to about 5 different Air Force bases. And it had Wankel rotary engines in it. It had 7 engines in it. It was a hovercraft because it had tires and wheels on it, but it'd pick up off the pavement about 10 or 12 inches, and you could go down the freeway with it. I mean, it was the neatest.
Really?
It would have been a lot of fun. But, and the people in Davis, California that invented this car and built it said that they could mass produce those for $50,000 a piece. Well, I thought, boy, that'd be neat. But there was a little catch to it. After taking this thing around to all the Air Force bases and and they always had a test pilot there flying it, driving it down the highway, taking it off, going up with it. It was pretty neat. But the catch to that was that you had to have a helicopter pilot's license rating to drive that car because it was off the ground and it hovered.
Really?
So that stopped the boys up there in Davis from building these cars. They've tried everything to get that passed to where you could still drive that car. It had a sonar unit in the nose of it, had a little deal stuck out, just like the Jetsons car, a little bubble canopy. Two people sit in there nice and comfortable. It was quiet. You could go down the road with it, and I rode in it one time. I can tell you, the thing was so quiet in there, you could hear the air going by, and that was it.
Wow.
But it was and let me tell you, I got memorable. I wasn't supposed to let the public see that.
Uh-huh.
But one of the colonels asked me if I'd push that thing out of my trailer and clean it for him. So I stopped at a streaking beacon, pushed it out of the trailer with some help, because it was pretty heavy. Pushed it out of the trailer, and it just happened there was a news reporter from a local TV station there. That was it, buddy. I mean, they was all over that thing but it got pretty memorable.
Yeah, wow.
It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed taking that thing around.
Now,
I hauled it for about 3 months.
Okay. About what year was that?
I think that thing was in 78.
Okay. Wow.
Somewhere along in there, 78 or 79. Came out of Davis, California.
It's amazing that someone else hasn't followed up with the same type of technology,
I know. It was so neat. That car was, boy, I tell you what, couldn't a guy have had a lot of fun with that?
Sure. Protection. You might say, well, I'm a guy, I don't need protection, or I was in the Marines, I don't need protection. You shared this morning that you carry a pistol with you. What are some of the things you've done over the years to keep yourself safe, physically safe, and things like that? And what advice would you give to some of these guys out there now to keep themselves safe? Because it's a different situation now than when you were.
It is completely different now, Chris, and you have to watch when you're walking in a truck stop nowadays. It's not like sharing information we did with the other drivers back 40 years ago. You walk in a truck stop nowadays, you want to watch what is walking around you and watch which way the guy's going. He might come around behind you and pull a gun on you or whatever, Don't let yourself get put into that position. I mean, you have to be aware all of the time. You have to be thinking, just like you're driving that truck. You don't want anything to happen. You're even at sleeping at night, and people ask me, well, how do you carry that little dog with you all the time? That little dog's in there because I can lay down and go to sleep and sleep comfortable, and if anything happens around my trucker wakes me right up. I mean, it's good protection. I've always carried that 45 since I got out of the Marine Corps. And for a long time, I could carry it up on the trolley valve, on the dash, hanging on the trolley valve. Most drivers don't know what a trolley valve is, but that's a trailer brake. Anyhow, I used to hang it on that little handle up there when it was in a holster. Then I carried it for a long time on the carpet, right beside my seat, but I don't have carpet anymore, so I sort of hide it in a little pouch right there next to me. I've never had to use it yet, but that yet part is maybe to come. I don't know. Things are getting tough out there, and where you're carrying a lot of money all the time, and you're carrying a lot of expensive cargo or whatever. You don't want somebody to come along and take it, and that's pretty well what I do. I got that little dog, and the old trucker. He lets me know everything, just like he let me know the time the guy was stealing my fuel. I didn't know what the hell he wanted. I thought he wanted to go out and go pee, but as it turned out, there was a guy siphoning my fuel. I had backed in beside the grass. I got out and let him go on the grass because I thought he had to go pee. And all I had on was my jeans. I'd just got up out of bed. He went to the back of the trailer and he looked up between me and the truck next to me. A trucker sort of like, that, there's something up here going on, you know. He said to me, like he was telling me, you know. And I thought, what the hell does he want? You know, and so I picked him up and I walked up between the trucks. Here's this hose stretched from that guy's truck over to my fuel tank. And I just sort of, I had trucker in my arms and I didn't want to get him involved in all of this stuff here. So I stepped over the fuel line, didn't pull it out or nothing. And I could hear the pump going, bzzz, you know, just buzzing away. So I walked around, put him in the truck, reached up and got my 45, stuck it in my belt, down in my pants, no t-shirt on or nothing. I walked back around to this guy's truck, and he had been sitting in his truck. When I walked up there the first time, he was sitting in there and he had his light on like he was doing his logbook. Well, I looked up there and I went on around and I got my pistol and come back. When I got back over there, he was in the sleeper. And I took the butt of that 45 and I hit that right where the clip is. I hit on that damn door. I hit it about 4 times. And I cussed him a little bit. I said, hey, buddy, you better come out here. You know, if you're bold enough to steal my fuel, you're bold enough to get your butt out here. So anyhow, I walked back and I put my pistol back in my belt, you know, and I reached and grabbed that fuel line with both hands, and I yanked it right out from under his truck. The damn thing just came out and wrapped around me and slapped me across the face, busted my lip, put a big whelp down on the side of my face. I was instantly mad. I turned around and walked back to the door of the truck, but I threw the hose between my tractor and my trailer. I threw it over in the grass. I walked back and I beat on the door a couple of more times. The guy wouldn't get out of there, and I had blood running down on my lip where that damn hose had a little piece of metal on the end of it, and it was. Anyhow, the guy wouldn't get out of the truck, wouldn't come out, wouldn't stick his head out of the curtain of the sleeper. I just stepped back and shot that damn fuel tank, you know, boom. Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever done. Instantly, I had 5 gallons of fuel dumped on me in my eyes, my face. I couldn't see nothing. It blew out of that hole in that tank. And that old 45 really puts a big hole in a fuel tank. Anyhow, I felt my way back around, got me a towel out of the truck, and I wiped off real good. I couldn't get the guy to come out of the truck at all. So I put my pistol in that towel and wrapped it up and stuck it in the side box. I got up in the truck and got to where I could see good, but it was burning me pretty good, you know. So I got in the shower. I got a nice shower in my truck, and I got up in there and I took a shower and just sort of cleaned up but all you could smell was diesel fuel. You know, I'd put a fresh pair of pants on, and I pulled up into another space up in front of me, and I sit there a few minutes like I thought, well, the law's going to be out here any minute. That fuel will run all over the parking lot out there, and somebody had to hear that 45. It made a loud noise, you know, and nobody came. Nobody was walking around out there. It was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. Nobody came. I just drove off, you know. I figured, well, this guy ain't going to go nowhere anyhow. Mm-hmm. I drove off. That was in Chakota, Oklahoma. I got down to Seminole at the 200 down there, and as I go past it, a state trooper came right down behind me, and he flipped his lights on to stop me. As he come up to the side of the truck, I opened my door, and he unsnapped his gun. I think he was scared of me or whatever, but he had his flashlight shining at me, and he shined his light in my damn eyes, and he says, God, were you involved in a altercation? I remember him calling it. I said, well, I guess if that's what you call it, it was an altercation. He said, well, did that guy hit you? Because I had that big whelp and I was still bleeding on the lip. And I said, no, the guy never got his head out of the sleeper, And he said, well, what happened? And I gave him the whole story about how I got mad because the damn hose broke, busted me. And then I shot the fuel tank, and that really had me pissed. And he says, and he never got out of the sleeper. And I said, no, sir, never once. And so I said, I just went on after that. And then you're stopping me here. That's all I know. He says, well, where's your handgun? I says, it's wrapped up in that towel down there in the side box. I said, you want me to get it? And I had a carry permit type deal in. It was one of them little temporary deals. He says, well, I don't need to see it. And like that, and he's talking to the guy down there with a radio on his shoulder up here. And he hit that button and he said, hey, call the guy by name down there. And he said, go out there and look and see if there's a hose on that lawn, the other side of where this guy's parked. And the guy went out there, and pretty soon he calls him back, and he says, yeah, the hose is on the lawn out here. He said, I got it right here. He says, well, you arrest that guy for stealing fuel. And he said, Mr. Spooner's going to go on to his load, so I've got all his information and blah, blah, blah. And that was it. That was all there was to it. Mm-hmm. I got a letter about a month later from the tax people, Oklahoma Tax Commission, that they had filed charges against that guy for stealing my fuel and for me to use that tax credit, They want to know how many gallons he stole. Hell, I couldn't tell them, But it was a pretty eventful.
Yeah, I'd have to say so.
That was the only time I ever pulled that 45 out and actually used it.
Yeah.
I've thought about it a lot of times. The guy could have got himself shot pretty damn easy.
Sure. Absolutely.
Fuel was the highest it's ever been at that point right there. Mm-hmm. And I can never understand an independent owner-operator guy stealing from a private owner-operator. Mm-hmm. I can't phantomize it. It is not part of what goes on,
I'm going to get into some of those questions that some folks wanted to know. Starting with the electronic logs. What's your opinion on electronic logs?
I think that the electronic logs, first off, is a pawn that these big national companies are using to keep track of their people, and it makes less paperwork for them in the office. I don't agree with it because for an owner-operator, it creates an unfair playing field. If you had a big office and they were monitoring your RPM and your truck and where you're going and your GPS and everything about it, it would probably work pretty good. Mm-hmm. But for these guys that's got one or two trucks, I don't think they should have to have it. And I think that it's a safety factor for big companies. It's, I drive from sunup to sundown every day on an oversize. But I don't want to be regulated. That would screw up a deal right there with the logs and what you can do and what you can't do.
Right.
It's just not going to work. It's not going to work for the independent guy that's out there, the little guy that's trying to make a living like I've made for the last 57 years.
Mm-hmm. Mitch Jones said, if you could do something else, or if you could go back to the beginning, would you have ever chosen to do anything else?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I would have. I've liked the way that this life has gone, and I don't believe I'd try to correct it, and a lot of people would probably go along with that. I mean, you might have some disagreements, but I think it's been a good even keel the way it's done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. J. Thomas Nudling says it would be interesting to hear about whether his wife or children or grandchildren ever trucked with you.
My wife ran with me a couple of trips, 3 or 4 trips. Went to quite a few shows with Snap-on and with consumer electronics. Then we had I've had the grandson rode with me. I hauled him all over the country. He enjoyed it. He didn't want to drive a truck, but he wanted to be part of it, you know. And now I've got great grandkids. I guess I might haul 1 or 2 of them.
Did you have a sleeper on the truck when you were running with your wife?
Yes.
And what size was that?
I had one on right before the one that's on there now. I had a 96-inch sleeper. Boy, what a nice sleeper that was. I got caught over in Memphis in a tornado that picked my truck up. I had there again was going to Las Vegas to the SEMA show. And that tornado picked me up, stood me up on my front bumper. My front bumper was, and my front wheel was touching the ground. Turned me around about 4 times, and then just laid me right over on my side. Like I was on a pillow. I had Richard Petty's 43 race car, the one he started with. I had that in the back. And had it all fastened down. All the exhibit for Snap-on that was in there, everything came out perfect. It just scratched the side of the trailer a little bit from where they picked it up, but it messed my old truck up pretty good. So I grabbed another truck that I had at home, and I went on to the show with the same trailer. Just spilt a little oil out of Richard Petty's number 43 car.
So we'll talk about an ordeal. And you were in the truck when that happened?
Yes, me and my wife. We were both in there, and it just stood us up and tore it up.
What was going through your mind at that point?
Oh, what's going to happen? No, I just it was. I held onto that old steering wheel so hard, and I told her But when it started picking that truck up, I told her to get back in the sleeper on the floor. And because I just knew there was going to be some busted glass and everything flying. Never broke the damn glass out of the truck. And she laid on the floor, the closet door opened, and all the clothes fell off on top of her where it was standing up on its end. And she didn't get a scratch. I didn't, neither one of us. That car probably weighed 3,500 pounds, and that exhibit, if I can remember right, it was about 16,000 pounds for that particular exhibit.
Okay.
And so I didn't have 20,000 pounds on there.
Okay.
But it was like having a big balloon. I had a 53-foot electronics trailer behind me.
Okay.
It was brand new Kentucky trailer. Just picked that thing up like it wasn't there, you know.
Wow. That's amazing. All right, so this gentleman also says, what would be your favorite engine over the years?
I think every one of them I had was favorite.
Yeah.
Because in 60, well, it was 70, I guess, when I took the 335 I had in there that was a pretty hot little motor, you know. I mean, I had all of the Bruce Mellison tricks in there, you know, the pistons that had ceramic coating. It was a 335 Cummins, but it had a taper nose crank. I had that thing kicking out about 600 horsepower. It was really a good motor. After that, I put a 475 twin turbo Cummins in there. That thing was just awesome. And I had a little competition going there with an old buddy of mine and everybody knows his name, and that was Southern Shaker, old Eddie Gant. We used to run back and forth across the country back early in the 60s when I was hauling to New York. He always had a big hot rod, so we got along good. Anyhow, then after that, I put a K model in there. It was a KTTA twin turbo. The only problem with that motor is it made me 13,900 pounds up on my front axle, which put me illegal for all the states that would only allow you 12,000. So I ran it about 4 months. I loved that motor more than anything I had. The best thing that I did probably, I ran a 444 for a long time, and that was a good motor. I had heard a lot of people bitch about them, but that thing would fly. I put a N14 in this truck now, and to me that's the best thing that Cummins ever made.
Yeah.
It's really a good motor. I love it, I tell you. And I get good at fuel economy with it. I got it cranked up there about 650 horse. It's all electric. I can reach over there on my dash now that I never had and push cruise, or I can go over and bump idle, or, it's a fantastic motor for an old fart.
So Josh Schroeder says, 7 million miles. What did you ever regret hauling?
One time I hauled a load of cow skins right out of the slaughterhouse. They were all salted down, and they smelled like they'd been laying out in the sun for about a week, and the buzzards were circling my trailer. So, no, it was so bad that when I hauled those cow skins, I stopped at a truck stop out there in Fontana. I was on the way into L.A. taking them to a hide company. And I stopped out there at Fontana, and after about 45 minutes in the truck stop, they asked me to leave.
Wow.
They stunk so bad that I could have loaded 40 dead cows on there, and it wouldn't have stunk as bad as what those skins.
Wow.
And those old hides are tough, buddy. And but that was the most unfavorable load that I ever hauled. And there again, it was for the money. My wood on my trailer soaked up that damn smell from the cowhides, so I steamed it. And I like to never got it out of that wood.
Wow.
It was,
so never again.
It was a never again load.
Josh also says, if you could change one thing about your experience on the road, what would it be?
One thing. Well, I don't know whether I should tell this right now, but I will. Sure. One time I was over at Speedy's truck stop over there in New Mexico, and there was a little gal walked up to me and said, "Are you going east?" And I said, yes ma'am, I am. And she says, "Well, my car's broke down over here." And she pointed at the car, and she says, "Can I get a ride over to Amarillo?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll give you a ride." Well, she got in my truck. I made her put her bags up on the trailer because I didn't know whether she was doing dope or what it was. Anyhow, she's sitting over that right seat, and I'm driving along, and we had a little conversation. It was just short. And pretty soon, I hear her talking to somebody. And I thought, what the hell? And this other person she was talking to would answer in another voice. So it sounded like she had two people. Then all of a sudden there was a little girl in the deal. And she would reprimand this little girl, and the little girl would talk back to her, but it was all coming out of this one person. I thought, boy, what kind of a nutcase do I got here? This is really, really, she's what they call bipolar or whatever it is. Man, I couldn't wait to get her out of my truck. I got over to Gallup which was only about 30 miles, And I said, you're gonna have to catch a ride with somebody else. I can't handle this. And she says, oh, well, I'll keep my conversation to myself. And I said, well, I think you are. You're. But anyhow, that was the most. I would never do that again, for sure. I hauled her all the way to Amarillo, and I had to virtually make her get out of the truck.
Really?
But she shut her mouth after a while. But I was scared to death of her. I thought she was some kind of witch or something,
Wow. David Meager asked, how did you deal with all the stress over the years?
That's a good one. I've had a lot of stress, and I've just sort of learned to bite my lip, and sometimes I get a little pissed off. I get mad at myself for getting in that position, but I just seem to make it through it because of all of the friends I got. They help me along. They make my life better, and I can visit and make my stress go away, get put on the back shelf, So that's pretty well how I do it. I might pick up my phone and call one of my old buddies and talk to him about what's happening, and we'll get off on another conversation, and pretty soon it's gone.
So friendships.
Yeah. Friendship means a lot to me.
So TJ Johnson, he asked, and we can probably back up a couple of years and said, what do you do to keep motivation to stay out here?
Sometimes I haul my old Harley with me, and I got friends that'll say, hey, Spinner, we're going to be out in Las Vegas next week. Why don't you get a load and come on out there and bring your Harley, and we'll just ride we'll go over to Boulder and whatever, or maybe ride over in the Grand Canyon. And so that's what I do. I motivate myself on every trip I make, whether it's, I've got friends in Sacramento, California. I've got friends in LA, California. And if I've got a load going anywhere out there, I call them when I leave, and I say, hey, I'm going to be out there next week. What are we doing? And I get with them, and just like my buddy down in Louisiana. I mean, I go off to Danny's place. Sometimes I don't want to go down there, but I just load her up and go, and I call him, and I tell him I'm gonna be down there. What are we gonna do? And I'll piddle with that, do that, or. It's pretty easy to get motivated if you want to do something, and I make myself want to do it.
Being able to go and visit with friends, that is a really good motivator, because
it makes all the difference in the world, Betty. I mean.
But Price Day, I'm kind of butchering his name, but he wants to hear the best lot lizard story.
Oh, Lord. The best lot lizard story. God, I'd have to skip all of that. But I've never messed with one of those gals. I've been tempted to a couple of times. Some of them are pretty shiny.
But I'm sure they come and beat on your door, and they probably want to ask you all sorts of things.
They come knock on the door, and I guess the best story would be one time I was doing a medical show down in San Antonio. And we all stayed out north of town at a big hotel. So, and it was a truck stop, and a truck stop had a big motel. So we parked out there, me and a guy named Carol Foster. And Carol Foster, he's the greatest Christian that you've ever met. I mean, he's what would be my idol, actually, and him and his wife were together. Levada was her name, and they're both pretty churchy people. They're always going to church, but their kids and my kids grew up together. He was hauling a load for me down to San Antonio to do a show, so we're all in the motel, and this gal comes over and knocks on my door. Well, my wife's with me. And when she looked in there and seen my wife back in the background, she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got the wrong room." And I said, "Yeah, I think you do. We're on the second floor, okay?" So she goes right over and knocks on Carol's door. And Carol Foster answered the door, and he's as polite a guy as you'll ever meet, you know. And he's talking to this gal, and all of a sudden his wife comes out about the time that she told him how much money she wanted to spend the night with him. See? And Levada pushed her. She says, "You get away from here. We don't associate with people like you." And she pushed her, and she went over the rail and into the swimming pool. That was the most memorable thing that I could take.
Wow.
God, I still laugh about it. It was so funny. I mean,
It washed her right up. Trey Halbert says, "What's the craziest thing you've ever witnessed on the road?"
I've seen everything on this highway, buddy. I was going over Sherman one day, coming out of Cheyenne. It had been snowing and snowing and blowing, and a woman came by me in a Volkswagen bus, one of those little buses like the hippies used to use. She had two little girls with her, and had suitcases piled all inside of this thing. And I thought, boy, she's crazy driving up that ice like that. And I was doing about 35, I guess. She was doing about 50. She come past me, and as she got past me, the wind just picked that thing up like that, up in the air, and laid it over on its side. Well, she slid a long ways being on ice, and she went over to the side, and I got up there, and I stopped, and this was back in the 60s, so I got digging in there, and I pulled her windshield out, and I got her and one little girl out, and the other little girl had her arm underneath a big case where it had smashed between the pavement and the window, and had her arm trapped in there. And I started flagging down people to help me pick that bus up off of that little girl to get her out of there. And the little girl was going into shock, you know, and I got these other drivers to stop and help me pick her up. I wrapped her up in a blanket and took her back to my truck, and the woman and her little girl, and I said, and this little girl's in shock. And I just thought, boy, oh boy, this is going to be a tough deal. And I went off of Sherman Mountain over there in glare-ass ice, running 70 mile an hour all the way down into Laramie to the hospital. That first exit down in Laramie. And I got her down to the hospital. But that's probably the worst thing that I've ever really been right there to witness all of it, you know. But
Wow.
I've seen a lot of bad wrecks, and I've been in California when somebody plowed into the front of another truck up there, and another truck into it, and I know better. I know what's fixing to happen behind me, so I'm getting out of the way. I drove right out into a big cornfield down there one time, and to get away from it. I knew what was off in the side, but you couldn't see it. The fog was so heavy, you know. I just pointed her out in there and run out in that big old field. And of course, the cops made a big issue of it, said, well, you ran off the road. Well, yeah, I ran off the road. I was getting out of the way of all them other guys. And they plowed into the trucks that was in front of me. You know, and there was about 40 trucks involved in that thing, but I wasn't one of them, you know, and I witnessed them all crashing into each other, just going and going and going. I didn't think it'd ever stop.
Wow.
But that was a bad deal.
What are some of the tactics that you use in order to, you know, keep out of harm's way and keep out of situations? You know, what do you do?
Well, if it was as bad as what I was describing before with the fog, I found me a way to get out of it. I just pulled off the first off ramp I could find that would put me way away from it, and I'd set it out. I just don't. If it's glare ice and you're going across Wyoming or you're going across Montana or wherever, and it's so bad that the trucks are piling up everywhere, I park it.
Yeah.
You know, I just don't want to tear my truck up.
Yeah, but now what about your delivery times and the shipper and the receiver and whatever else?
They'd be just as glad to get it tomorrow as they were today. That's the way I look at it. I mean, I sell them service, but I'm going to bring them everything that they had ordered. It's not going to be scattered down the highway someplace, and I'll tell them that, and they just have to go with it. I've been late for a few loads over 57 years, but as I look back on it, I'd do the same thing again.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to kill myself for somebody's load that doesn't mean as much as my truck means to me.
Correct. Or your life, you know, because for, you know, it might be some of these guys that they don't own the truck. But
man, I don't want to hurt nobody. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to run off the road and cause somebody to get killed or whatever. I mean, I'm just not going to be a part of that. And I wake up every day thinking, boy, I'm gonna watch what I'm doing today. Mm-hmm. You know.
Matt Kelly says, I would first ask if you enjoy it. If yes, was there ever a time that you didn't love doing it, meaning driving?
No. There was one time that I really wished I wasn't in the truck, but I had already gone, you know, and I stayed. But I enjoy every day getting in that truck. I think I've had an attitude of every day's a holiday, every meal is a banquet, and I've been since the Marine Corps. I love it. I don't want to do anything else. I had a big divorce over just getting in that damn truck and going. As a matter of fact, she slammed the door on my leg 3 or 4 times. She said, "You think more of that damn truck than you do of me?" And I said, "Well, that's not so, but I've got to go." You know, and I'd go. So it was just that. My wife got badly burnt one time, and I put one of my sons in my truck and sent it on out to. He was going to L.A. to the convention. I put him in there and sent him on, and I went to the airport and caught a ride and went back home. I spent about 5 days over there in the hospital. They flew her to Memphis. She was burnt so bad. I spent about 5 days over there in Memphis, and I missed my truck, but I did miss my wife too. Yeah. You know, so I just took the good for the bad there.
Right. Dale Rowe says, over your long career, what's the biggest change that you've seen in the trucking industry?
The biggest change is the internet, and that has ruined the trucking industry as far as allowing these people to get on this internet and bid for loads, or these brokers that they got nowadays. You know, he'll broker the load. He'll tell them, "Oh yeah, I can haul that for $10,000." And he's going to pay you $3,000 for hauling it. You know, that's the biggest change that I've ever seen, and it's all due to the internet. That guy can sit in his living room and book all these loads. He doesn't have any investment but a computer and electricity and a coffee pot maybe, and he books loads that he doesn't know the first thing about a damn truck, or how they run down the highway, or what it costs to do it. But he's going to book that load, and some guy's going to say, "Well, you know, I live out in Las Vegas, or I live out in San Francisco, and that load's going right by my house. I think I'll just take it." People are hauling right now cheaper than what I did in 1960. I mean, I was getting $1.50, $2 a mile back in 1960. Diesel fuel was 13 cents a gallon. when I bought that truck, I pulled it up and put 140 gallons in it. It was 13 cents a gallon. I thought, boy, this is, this ain't going to be bad. But 13 cents was a lot of money too. And there were several times that I didn't have change, nothing but change in my pocket. I'd pull in and get $1.50 or $2 worth of diesel at 13 cents a gallon, and go home. I mean, I was broke, but that's all part of it, I guess.
Yeah. Now, Justin Perkins says, I myself, as a young driver, would like to hear some advice that you have to pass on to the next generation of truck drivers. And you've been giving a lot. He's been driving since he was 14, and he's soon to be 28. I learn new things every day. Just to be curious to hear what someone with that kind of miles and that kind of knowledge would have to pass on.
Well, I just, the only thing that I could pass on to somebody that's been driving already 10, 14 years, he must be doing good, and he must be well liked. Just share what you're doing with your wife and your family, and that's the biggest thing, I think, is to keep them in knowledge of everything you have to do and why. I believe that there again, he can never forget that he's only selling that service to him, and I think he'll do good. If he's started at 14 and he's still there at 28, he's going to make a super trucker. And I'd like to meet him.
Justin Raymer says, what's the hardest part about keeping a truck going for that long?
It all comes down to maintenance on that deal. I probably, sometimes I'll even get to thinking, I'll be driving along and I think I hear something back in the back or whatever. I might pull over in a rest area, put on my damn coveralls and grease all my drive lines, grease everything, check my fan hubs, check everything, and go again. I think maintenance is the biggest issue that you can get into, and to keep a truck running that long, you have to update. I went from an old mechanical engine up to a computerized engine now, and I love it. It's a challenge to do. That's something that you think about every day when you're driving a truck that you own. How am I going to keep this thing going? And I just have managed to do that over the years with the maintenance and know-how of what makes that truck run.
Thomas Netling would love to hear, he's a sergeant, I believe. He would love to hear any stories, particularly positive or particularly funny experiences that you've had with law enforcement. You just said one, but that was kind of like not on your, not on your account.
Christopher, I hate to tell you this one, but being from Montgomery, Alabama, I used to be pretty prejudiced back in the 60s, and I sort of grew out of that because I worked a lot with Willie Irving. He was a tight end for the Houston Oilers. Him and Gene Layton, they both own a trucking company out in California, and it's called Touchdown Trucking, and they have a Houston Oilers helmet painted on the door of their truck. Well, one time it was really funny. I was going into Texas, and I come through Pecos over there, and they had that was when the 55 mile an hour speed limit was. I was going through Pecos, Texas, and all of a sudden this big old trooper comes down behind me. I'm running about 70. Okay, so here he comes, and I had my logbook all up. I was ready for him, but he come walking up beside me. He said, let me see your paperwork, your registration, your driver's license, And I turned like that, and I looked at him, and I swear, Christopher, this guy was the tallest man I've ever seen in my life. I looked him right straight in the eye. and I started laughing. He says, "What are you laughing at, boy?" He calls me, And I looked at this big black guy. Nice. He was a nice guy. I looked out like that, and he says, "What are you looking for?" And I said, "I was looking for the box you're standing on." I said, "I don't think I've ever seen anybody." I said, "You ought to be playing basketball. You shouldn't be out here writing tickets." It went on and on. I kept popping a few at him, But that was the funniest time with the law enforcement that I've ever. And you know what? He didn't write me a ticket.
Yeah.
We laughed and carried on there, and he was a nice kid.
Yeah.
He was a young guy.
Well, that's good. You kept him entertained enough, huh?
Huh?
You kept him entertained enough.
Oh, I kept him entertained for about 5 minutes there, and he said, "Listen," he said, and he handed me all my paperwork back, my license and everything. He says, "You're going up here, but you run 55 mile an hour. That's the law." Mm-hmm. And he says, "You be careful." Mm-hmm. Away I went.
That's funny.
I've had a few old cops that I used to cuss pretty good, I couldn't understand why they was giving me a ticket, Of course, I could have papered my walls in the house with all the tickets that I got when I had all the horsepower in my truck, because I always ran fast,
I was telling you yesterday about one of the reasons that I wanted to start doing this series of videos was to kind of capture the essence of what has gone on and the accomplishments of a lot of gentlemen and ladies that are still out there on the road. And one person told me about a gentleman. It went by the name of the Southern Shaker, which I didn't know of. And then after the fact, unfortunately he passed away, but after the fact, it made me realize, it made me kind of speed up my pace to kind of, start trying to, get some of these captured. So you said that you knew Eddie well, and you used to run with him. So, tell some stories that you guys would get up to. You mentioned that he had a hot rod, and you liked tall gears, and you guys would run together. So let's hear what you guys would get into.
Well, I'm an old street rodder, I guess. That's what my wife says all the time. She says, "Hell, you could, you don't care about any other magazine just so you get street rodder." And I do. I like street rodder, and I fantasize about having me a little 32 with a big old super blown engine in it, and just get out and cut up like a kid, like I was 15 again. Well, I had a 33 Ford, and that's what put me in the Marine Corps, as a matter of fact. I was drunk the night I was running around in that thing. The judge didn't like that at all. Gant, he had a good-looking woman, and so did I, and he'd haul produce going east. I was hauling trade shows or exhibits or something, and I was always pretty light, on the weight. Eddie, he'd load a double load. He wouldn't make it to him and run 100 mile an hour down the road with it, There was stories about him which are not true, because I know old Gant. I knew old Gant real well, and some of them that said, "Oh, they caught him over there in New Mexico running, or Arizona running 150 mile an hour." Well, I know better than that. I know what trucks will do, and I know what kind of gears you couldn't do it. The tires wouldn't do it. There was stories about Gant that were true, and he was an outlaw. He was really an outlaw. We all were outlaws, I think. I ran around that damn Arizona port more times than I went across it, and we all did. I went into New York City with a load one time. He was going into New York over there to Hunts Point. So I followed him out there just to see what the hell they were doing. We was partying together a little bit, and him and old Reject and Hard On and all those guys, they were all out there at Hunts Point, and they were all friends of mine that that we ran together and talked. We always talked trash about how fast them trucks would go and how pretty them women were, you know. And so we we had a good camaraderie there, and that's how I was with Eddie and the whole deal. And I just met one of Gant's family down here in Louisiana. We was at Ruston at the truck show, and I looked over there and it said Gant on the side of that Aerodyne Kenworth, an old Aerodyne, and I remember the truck. I remember seeing that truck, and the guy sort of had the same features and talk as old Eddie did. You know, he said he was just a cousin, but he's still a Gant, and he has a reputation to live up to. You know, and that's like my kids are all saying, Dad, I don't know whether I'll ever be able to live up to the reputation you used to put out here. Well, I've changed it a lot, and I hope they do. You know,
a lot of guys they want to hear those outlaw kind of stories. So some guys are like, oh yeah, these guys used to run at night with their lights on. They used to do this, used to do that. I mean, like,
we used to do a lot of crazy stuff, but the most outlaw things that I did was never run across the scale. I could go from California to New York and never cross a port or a scale, you know, and I knew where all of them were. I've been caught a few times. Louisiana was bad about catching you over on the old highway, but if you were on the interstate, say you was on 10 going across there, it's 80,000 pounds gross. You get over on the old road, and I think it's 94,000 pounds gross over there, and you're still legal, you know. So we used to run that old road all the time and jump back on right after the scales. Just a lot of little things. There's not a scale in California that you can't run around. Might be a little further, you know, but they're there to run.
Did guys run at night with their lights off?
I went past the New Mexico scale over there that wasn't supposed to be open one night, and as a matter of fact, old Gant was right there with me, and we both turned our lights off, and we went past that scale over there in New Mexico going into Arizona. It's no longer there, but the area is still there, you know. And it was 13 miles from there to the state line. I went by that scale with my lights off one night. I know I was running over 100 mile an hour, and old Gant right there, boy, we was just getting it. The bad part about that was a guy named Peter Rabbit. He was doing the same thing behind us. We were all running there together, and old GI Reject and all of us were all going across there. Peter Rabbit, his name was Peter J. Gundy, and everybody called him Peter Rabbit, but he was doing the same thing, maybe an hour behind us, and when he went by there, he turned his lights out, and there was a Leeway truck. Leeway used to be as big as CF. Okay, so Leeway came out of the scales. He just took both lanes. There wasn't nothing coming. He couldn't see nothing. Put old Gundy right down the middle of between the roads. He went down through there and just tore up everything. I mean, but he had to tell you what kind of outlaw he was. Gundy had a load of cheese in the front and a load of chemicals behind it, which is like a no-no.
Yeah.
You don't do that kind of. But he had two good customers, and both of them loaded 40,000 pounds in there, and away he went. Needless to say, he went to the hospital in a jail ward up there. And another guy they called Hard On. He was always hard running, you know. Hard On had an old truck. It was a 359 Peterbilt, and it was Midnight Blue. It was the name. He had Midnight Blue painted up on the side of the truck. He came in there and dressed up like a doctor with a white coat and everything, and wheeled old Gundy out of that hospital, and that's how he got out of there. Right past the cop, right past everything. So They were outlaws. I wasn't part of that deal.
Because you're.
Of course, I would have done it if I had to. But then I had an old buddy of mine that backed over the scales over in Mexico, Missouri. He got a ticket that morning on the other side in Mexico. The guy gave him a ticket, and I forgot what it was for, but old Panama they call him Panama Red. He wore a big old Panama woven hat, you know. He came back that afternoon. The scale was closed over there, so he just pulled out in the parking lot. He's pulling an RGN, and he backed over that scale, just mowed half of it down. Well, it just turned out that the cop was in the other half, taking a going to the bathroom.
10-200.
Oh, and anyhow, when old Panama pulled away, his license plate was tore off from the bricks and the rock, so they got him. They caught him, but they had to go to Missouri to get him.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, he was an outlaw. You know, along with Gant and all the rest of them. There was one guy, I cannot remember what. He was a red-headed guy. He was going into Alabama, but he got pulled into the Mississippi scales over there on old US 80. Cop pulled him in there, and it was late at night. Started writing him a ticket. Well, he took that cop and took his gun and put him up on the back of that trailer with a big motor grader and chained him to it with his own handcuffs and took him over into Alabama and give him his gun back. You know, he emptied it out, give him his gun back, and told him he wasn't taking no damn ticket. He took the guy's ticket book and everything that he was writing. And now that was an outlaw. I can't remember what his name was, but he was a friend of Panama Red.
Yeah.
And I heard all about it 8 or 10 times. That was a big talk on the radio about how he had done it. Well, the guy quit right after that. He couldn't run anymore. They caught him, but I don't know whether he ever went to prison or jail about it. But he actually kidnapped that guy out of the scale and put him up there. And when he got over in Alabama, he stopped on the bridge over there on the Tombigbee River, and he took the handcuffs off and put the guy on the bridge out there where he was on the rail of the bridge, handcuffed him to that. No radio, nothing back then. So,
wow.
Yeah, there was a lot of crazy outlaws back then.
Yeah.
It was just the era that we grew up. We could do stuff like that. You can't do that now. They got people with cameras on their buildings. They're taking pictures of everything, you know. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's a damn shame these kids don't get to find out some of the fun we used to have.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. They won't be able to experience it firsthand.
No, not in this period in time.
But guys still like to enjoy some nice horsepower in their truck and whatnot.
Yes.
So back then, you know, when, because again, you mentioned you liked the big horsepower and tall gears and things like that. What was it like for you to, modify your truck and then to be out there and to really enjoy it perform?
Well, I became a pretty good mechanic, and my oldest son also, we worked in the shop together doing things to my truck to make them run better. You know, I've got a turbo that's on that old truck right now any gear that I'm in, I can get 50 inches of manifold pressure with it just right now. It's a good pulling truck. It's probably pushing 600 horse right in there. And that's enough for me. I don't want any more. You know, I mean, I could do a lot different. I had a lot of friends that had them 3408 cats. They just more horsepower than the law would allow, you know. They were lighter than the K model. You know, I put that K model in mine for 3 months. I couldn't afford it, but that thing had outrun a Corvette.
Yeah.
I mean, so we did a lot. I'm satisfied with reaching over, pushing that cruise control and going down the road, and it's more relaxing and it cuts back that pressure on you.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
You're not worrying about where the next cop is or what's going on and what you're going to tear up, you know. So I've tore up a lot of equipment just by wanting to do dumb things, you know. I never would figure back in 1964, 65, back in there, that you'd be running down a highway with all of these big companies running 70 mile an hour all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, God, I can remember how many tickets I got at 70 mile an hour and had to pay them.
Wow.
Now they do it for free.
Sure.
I paid those tickets. You couldn't get away with them because when the states started getting reciprocity with each other, they made it almost impossible to not pay a California ticket or not pay a Florida ticket or whatever. And it made it tough where I couldn't have 3 driver's licenses. You know, at one time I had I had 3 driver's licenses. I had an Oklahoma license, I had a New Mexico license, and I had a California license. And it gets really confusing when the same cop stops you twice and you don't remember what license you gave. And then I was a cowboy at that time. I cowboyed a little. I had a big old buckle and had my name on it, you know. And I handed him my license one day that had a Hudson name on it. The cop looked at my belt buckle and he says, "Oh, you're not Spooner?" Yeah. So you do dumb stuff, you know. But it was all part of in that era, you know, of growing up, and kids nowadays try to live up to that what we used to do, and they can't do it. It's impossible to do.
Yes, it
and
is.
I feel sorry for them that they can't, because we had the best of the best. You know, if you look back at it.
There's a picture that's floating around of a guy who's parked. You can see his truck in the background, and he's standing there talking in a phone booth. You know. So what was it like to even communicate back home before the age of a cell phone? What was that like for you?
Well, I tell you, I graduated into a bag phone. You know, they used to have a little big bag, and I carried it on all the shows to get home. But I also carried a pocket full of quarters. And I can remember when a nickel would get you a telephone call. And you'd have to wait for an operator to switch you to another operator. And there might be 5 other people talking on the same line. The cell phones and stuff have changed the technology of what's happening out on the road. It's just a whole nother world. It changed our world drastically. I coped with it, and I made it into this deal, and now I'm wondering what the future's going to be. Are we going to have jet engines in that old yellow truck? Or what are we going to do, you know?
Or electric, you know.
Or electric, or whatever it'll take, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
We'll learn to live with the new trucks and the new technology just like we did in the past. And I hope trucking keeps on forever. I'll be up there watching.
To the distance, like ghost riders in the sky. Black smoke and white line, steel horses side by side. It's more than just a living, y'all. Hell, it's our way of life. We're the last of the cowboys, the giddy up gone boys. 18 wheels on the concrete, it's a slowing down breed. We're the like Jesse James, modern day outlaw gang. If you're out here riding with me, back and make some noise. We're the last of the cowboys. It's a family tradition, diesel's running through our veins. Our daddy showed us the roads, we were born in the fast lane. Branded by our heroes, taught to saddle up and move. Keep this country rolling, we're damn proud of what we do. We're the last of the cowboys, the giddy up gone boys.
these kids up there on the bridge want me to blow the horn.
Yeah, you can't deny them that. Well, Bob, we had us a good conversation the other day, and I really appreciate you sitting and chatting there. So now the show's over, and we find ourselves out here on the highway, and you're headed on back down the road. Now, a lot of guys, they come up to you and they ask you about the truck and whatnot, so we'll go ahead and rattle off exactly what the truck is. And we didn't talk about the sleeper at all much, so tell the viewers what the truck is so they'll know for sure they're looking at it, they won't mistake it for anything else, and then tell us about the sleeper too.
Okay, yeah, I bought this sleeper in '89. It's a 120 inch, actually about 116 inch, but I've got shower, toilet, got satellite TV, I got a forced air 15,000 BTU air conditioner heater combo up there. It really makes it comfortable in there. Got a hot water heater. If I plug in someplace or I run the generator, it heats my water. So it's all the comforts of home, plus a little, I guess.
Now, you didn't mention who made it or what brand it is.
It's a double eagle sleeper made up in Shipshewana, Indiana. The Amish people built it up there. They all work in the place that built it, and it's about the most well-made sleeper on the market that was on the market at the time I bought it. They're no longer in business. The owner just decided to retire and said he had had enough. So, but there's still a few of them around, and they're sort of sought after. You know, they're one of the better looking sleepers. The reason I liked it was it had square doors on it. You know, you got a little compartment down there on the side that you could put your groceries in when you go shopping, or put your clothes through there if you're gonna go, put them in the closet or whatever. It's got a big old walk-in closet down there. You know, I mean, I can hang a lot of clothes in it.
Well, 10-4, I got to peek inside earlier, and yes, it is really set up nice. Now, did you say what year that sleeper was built in?
1989.
So we're looking at that for its age. It's got some really modern features and some nice comforts, like you mentioned.
It does. I'll tell you what, it's the most comfortable sleeper that I believe you could get on the market. You know, I got a little 8,000 watt generator that runs all of that 15,000 BTU air conditioner up there. So and it's quiet. You don't ever hear it. I got a big inverter in there if I don't want to run the generator and bother the guy next to me over there. I just run the inverter, and it's a 4,000 watt inverter which runs the air conditioner and everything while I'm sitting.
Well, that's really considerate of you. I mean, that's something that most guys don't talk about, but they do talk about being disturbed at night when somebody does come and park there. I mean, what does a 4,000 watt inverter cost?
An inverter is, you can buy that inverter at Harbor Freight for around $450.
You know, that's not a bad investment at all.
Well, it saves you a lot of fuel, saves you a lot of headaches. It runs all that microwave, and it kicks over on the refrigerator. The refrigerator's running, on 12 volt, but when you connect that inverter or the generator, it kicks over to 110 volt.
Talk about the truck. Go ahead and rattle off the specs on the truck.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. It's a 1961 model Peterbilt, model 281 originally, and I've stretched it and had the extra axles, but it's got now it's got an N14 Cummins in it. I had a 250 in it when I bought it, but it's got all of the right stuff, I think, for me. It's got an 18-speed, and I put the new DS404 Eaton rear ends under it. They're a 355 ratio, so it makes me run comfortable down the highway at 65, 70, 75 if I want. But without any problem, and it's really a comfortable truck.
You know, we've seen it in photos for many years since the first video that we did. So it's been a goal of mine to get out here and run down the road with you and capture it while it's while it's doing this thing in your natural habitat, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I've changed just virtually all of it but the looks, I guess, and I've updated. In other words, I've got I got front wheel brakes on it now, and I've got all hub pilot wheels all the way around. The DS404 heat and rears that I put under here put me with better brakes. I got the bigger drive lines. Just everything about it. I drove down the road staring through this window and looking out here, and it's just it's like I say, it's just right for me.
And now some guys, they feel attached to their truck in a way where the truck has a name, or they feel a certain way about it. And is there a certain way that you feel about your truck after owning it for so long and driving it for so many miles?
I even think about it in my sleep sometimes. No, I consider it's just like part of the family anymore. I have a lot of times I have people, and even my friends, that say, Spooner, when you're gone, you're going to will me that truck. And there's a lot of them that I wouldn't mind willing it to, that I really like, and know they would carry on the tradition with the truck. And so I think about that all the time. But I've never put a name on this old truck or anything. I just sort of go down the highway, and that of course Yosemite Sam up there in the front. When of course right now he's not out there because when the water temp gets up about 185, he kicks back, and that's where I'm at right now, 185. So on the water temp. So. Yeah, this thing runs cool all the time, but no, it's a handy deal, to have the camaraderie we got out here, and people know how I feel about my truck. I guess, I eat, sleep, and drink this old Peterbilt. That's about the way it goes.
I'd like to say again, I may sound like a broken record, but I really appreciate being able to spend some time with you, and I look forward to seeing you at another show or anywhere else.
I'm gonna do my best to be there. I enjoy these trade shows or these conventions like this that we went to for the truck convention. It's a fun deal where I don't have to get out and work, and meeting people and enjoying the friendship and the relations that you gather by being there is what it's all about for me. I mean, I don't think I would dare miss one.
Definitely. And I'm going to ask you one other question. It has to do with the American Truck Historical Society. Explain to the viewers, for those that don't know what it is, explain to them in your words what that is.
It's just the American Historical Truck Society is a gathering of truckers that have built an old truck or thought a lot of their truck like I do. I joined it a long time ago, and because I felt like I fit right in with that group, and they're always buying and building and doing, whether it's an engine, whether it's transmissions, whether it's chrome pipes or chrome bumper. They're always the whole group. They're enormous how many people are on this association. I mean, it staggers my mind sometimes. Hell, we had 1,250 here, Chris. Plus trucks. We had some that didn't come through the gate because there wasn't any room left in there.
that number of trucks, and to have a situation where there's no more parking and you can't get a truck in there, that's and that fairground, it was no small fairground. It was humongous in terms of the fairgrounds that I've gone to. So that's quite astounding, and they had trucks in every nook and cranny there.
It was so much fun that there were people even parked in the street that wouldn't leave it. They'd come back into the show.
Nice.
All I can say, man, it's been a pleasure with you, and I just, you've made yourself into something that you got big shoes to keep filled.
So it's my pleasure to be out here to do what I can do. So you guys make it easy for me. And what'll end up happening is that, this will get out there and people will enjoy it. And I'm going to, ask you to start thinking about some other gentlemen that are just as accomplished as you are in terms of trucking. So that way we can pass the torch on and we can get some other people in front of the camera and enjoy some other stories as well.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I enjoy the people, so it's going to be a pleasure. And I've had more enjoyment and fun off this show than any of them that I've ever been to, I think. Enjoyed you, all your questions, and I hope the people that watch your video are well pleased with it too.
10-4.
Yep, go boys. 18 wheels on the concrete. It's slow and dying breed, rolling like Jesse James. A modern day outlaw game. If you're out here riding with me, come on back and make some noise. We're the last of the cowboys. Modern day outlaw game. We're the last of the cowboys. We're the last of the cowboys. Saddle up, boys.